In the second video of Unit 2, we're going to continue to compare Egypt and Mesopotamia. Today we're going to talk about some facts that go along with those societies. We're also going to talk about some of the most famous rulers from each. And then we're also going to talk about their religious beliefs, how they were alike and how they were different. That's going to be a big factor when we start talking about another group from the Middle East later on that are monotheistic. Both of these groups are polytheistic. Okay, I hope you enjoy this video, and make sure you check out, of course, the big ideas at the end of the video.
Okay, let's talk about civilizations in each of the two societies. One of the main city-states, and that is a city and the land around it that forms in Mesopotamia, is called Sumer. So this area is often referred to as Sumer or Sumerian. People from Asia started to pour into Mesopotamia sometime around 3500 BCE. By 3000 BC, there were 12 city-states. And again, a city-state is a city and the land surrounding it. My favorite city-state happened to be but that's only because I like to do that joke where they say, "Where are you from?" And I go, No, where are you from? All right, you don't have to be obnoxious about it. But that's what I, try to do. Okay, the most famous of these 12 city-states was probably the city of Babylon, which is, of course, in the Bible and in many other references throughout history. So what was... Well, first off, Sumerian life was pretty much dominated by military rulers. At first, some of the city-states actually had democratically elected governments, but soon there were threats. Remember how I said it was open for invasion? So who do you turn to? The toughest guys. Military rulers took power. Soon they started to pass on their rule to their sons, and this is the start of hereditary rule. And these leaders will become monarchs, kings. They'll also be the leaders of theocracies, which means that the ruler was not only the ruler of the government, but he was also head of the religion. Now, the Sumerian life, these are pictures of kings. Aren't they really nice? The kings usually had really good advisors as well to advise them on all types of issues, from trade to agriculture, just about everything. There was also a very rigid class system in Sumerian life. There was a ruling class, there was a working class, and of course, like a lot of the ancient civilizations we're going to talk about, there was slavery, and slavery was accepted. Now, in terms of the everyday person, men were very, very dominant in Sumerian life. A man in Sumeria could sell his wife and children into slavery if he was in debt. It was very easy for him to get a divorce. But can you imagine if you came home from a poker game and said, "Hey, honey, you belong to Fred. I lost at poker last night."
Holy shnikes.
Yeah, that might be a tame response. Now, for women, divorce was much more difficult. In some limited circumstances, they could own and sell land. All right, I do want to talk to you about probably the most famous ruler of the area of Sumeria. Now, he actually doesn't even come into power until much later, when his group of people come in and take over. At first they were called the Amorites, but then later on some people referred to them as the Babylonians. His name is Hammurabi, and probably what he's most famous for is a written law code that's called Hammurabi's Code. Now, the interesting thing is Hammurabi's code was harsh. This is where you get the concept of an eye for an eye. So, in other words, if you did something that knocked out someone else's eye, your eye would be removed. They also had some unique sort of situations. For example, if I was a builder and I built a house and it fell down and killed a man's child, according to Hammurabi's code, my child's life would be forfeit. Now, the problem with that is that my child didn't do anything. But here's the deal. Hammurabi's code is written, and up until this point, usually leaders decided their laws on a whim. So the fact that you had specific punishments for specific crimes and they were written down was a pretty big change and a pretty big step forward. We'll talk much more about details of Hammurabi's code as we get further into the lessons, and as that'll be part of the lessons in class. All right, now I do want you to know that the code didn't apply to everyone equally. There were different levels of punishment depending on which class you belonged to. Okay, after we do the discussion in class about Hammurabi's code, you'll be filling in this part of your notes. But I'm going to expose you to several specific examples of the code in class. Okay, so what was Egyptian civilization like? Well, nomads started coming to the Nile River Valley as early as 5000 BCE. Small villages started to form there because the agriculture was very good right along the river. Now, eventually, these small villages will become small kingdoms who have strong rulers. Again, the toughest guy is usually chosen. And they will become monarchies and theocracies again. Again, ruled by a king, and the leader is also a religious leader. Now, some rulers become incredibly powerful, and these kingdoms start to fight one another. And later on, these kings are going to be called pharaohs. Finally, all of the kingdoms will be united around 2700 BCE. There were two that were left, an upper kingdom and a lower kingdom. And the king that united them is a guy named Menes. And he wanted to unite everyone so much that he took his white crown and mixed it with a red crown, so it looks like a bowling pin in a coffee cup holder, which is what I have pictured here on the screen. Now, women could own land, but had very few rights in Egyptian society. Okay, so what was the class structure like in ancient Egypt? Of course, you had the pharaohs and the rulers at the top. Below them, you had priests and nobles. And then there was a merchant class who sold and traded items. And then you had peasants for labor and menial tasks, and of course, once again, slavery. If you put it in Egyptian pyramid form, this is what it looked like. All right, I do want to tell you about a couple of their famous rulers as well. Menes, who I mentioned, united Upper and Lower Egypt. By the way, he set up his capital at Memphis. So you know what that means, right? You have the king in Memphis. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I should have had an Elvis song playing here. Another famous pharaoh is Hatshepsut. And the reason Hatshepsut is famous is because she's the first female pharaoh. She actually took over for her husband when her stepson was too young to take power. The Pharisees asked her to take over. He was only 3. You don't want a 3-year-old running a kingdom. You know, he breaks a toy and he kills everyone. That's not cool. So Hatshepsut was asked to take the job until he came of age. The problem was that she was great at it. She didn't really worry about fighting and all these other stuff, and she improved the kingdom. She had great irrigation projects, and so they kept asking her to stay on. She finally died from a mysterious illness when her stepson, Thutmose III, was somewhere around 21 years of age. Many thought that he may have played a role in her death, but there's not any evidence to prove it. Now, the next pharaoh is a guy named Amenhotep. We refer to him more often as Akhenaten, and I sort of remember him by the fact that he Akhenaten have done what he did, because he forced everyone to believe into his one god. He believed in a sun god called the Atan, and he said everyone else was going to have to follow his god, and he got rid of all of their temples, and he closed them down. He moved the capital, and he wasn't very popular. He was supposedly married to one of the most beautiful women in the world, Nefertiti. But when he died, they had to hide his body because they didn't want him to be his body to be destroyed. Because we'll talk more about how mummification, they believe the mummied body allowed people to live on in the next life. All right, now when he died, his son Thutmose, or King Tutankhamun, King Tut took over. Of course, Tut died early, but the interesting thing is his tomb was decorated with amazing items all through it, and it's because he let everyone go back to their own religion. The last pharaoh that I want to talk to you about is a guy named Ramses the Great. Here's his mummy. I'm sure he looked better when he was alive. Ramses the Great was a great builder, a great conqueror, and many other things. But probably the thing that jumps out at people is that they think he may have fathered over 200 children. Talk about a busy pharaoh. Okay, so pause the video after this, and what I would like for you to do is tell me which pharaoh you think had the greatest impact. You may want to do a little research on this on your own. There'll be some links to take you to some of the Egyptian pages on your classroom site, and that might help you out. But, pick out which pharaoh you think had the biggest impact on Egypt. Okay, I want to talk to you quickly about the writing systems. In Sumeria, the first writing is something called cuneiform. And this is what it looked like. It's sort of like a bunch of triangles and dashes. It didn't start out this way. People actually started out by drawing pictures. And then they sort of evolved into these symbols. Now, it means wedge-shaped. That's what cuneiform means, cuneiform. And it was written in wet clay with a stylus. And we'll talk much more about this when we get to our Prezi on the languages of the Middle East. You needed to have scribes to write in cuneiform. And the reason is that there were so many symbols. I have trouble remembering 26 letters in the alphabet. Can you imagine having to remember between 20 and 30,000 symbols? No way, Jose. And again, they started out as pictures and evolved to symbols. One more important item that you want to know about the Sumerian writing system. It was not based on sounds. How about the Egyptians? Their most famous language is called hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics actually means sacred carvings. It was written on a reed-like plant called papyrus, or it was carved into stone. You also needed scribes because there were thousands of symbols again. Again, it started out as pictographs that became symbols. And these are also not based on sounds. So what do they look like? I'll show you on the next screen. All right, now I do want you to know that Egyptians did not write in hieroglyphics in everyday writing. They had a language called Demotic, which was a simpler version of this. Things look like. This is cuneiform, a little bit bigger so that you can see it. And this is hieroglyphics. All right, this is the Rosetta Stone. It was famous because it was used to decode hieroglyphics. When it was discovered, it had 3 languages on it. It had Greek, Demotic, and they said the same thing. So historians and scientists used this to decode the 3rd language, which was hieroglyphics, and it allowed them to break it down and to figure out how hieroglyphics worked. There'll be much more about the languages on the Prezi when we get into your class links, and we'll actually do that Prezi in class. All right, so now on your notes, I want you to analyze why a company that teaches people languages, Rosetta Stone, the language company, why would they pick the name Rosetta Stone after what you just found out about hieroglyphics? Okay, the last topic that we're really going to talk about is religion. In Sumeria, they were polytheistic, and that means that they believed in many gods. If you're monotheistic, you believe in one god. We'll talk about an important religion with that later in this unit. Now, the Sumerians, remember how I said they were pessimistic? They believed that the gods didn't care about people, really were, oblivious to what people wanted or did. Now, in their afterlife, they believed it was just as bad as life. Man, that's depressing. So you died and you went into an afterlife where you once again just served the gods. Wow, that's pretty bad. Their gods were tied to nature. Their chief god was called An. He represented the seasons, but they had other gods too, gods of wind and agriculture. This was one of, oops, wrong picture came up. You got to love my prezis. They also had a daily lesser gods called evil Udugs. And I thought that those were pretty impressive. Let me go back a couple steps here. And the evil Udugs were sort of responsible for when you were having a bad day. And say that you forgot your homework. Well, you would say, hey, Mr. Burner, I'm sorry, the evil Udug stole my homework. Or if your mom wanted you to, put out the trash and you forgot. You said, Mom, I took the trash out. I think the evil Udugs brought it back. Sounds like an escape to me. All right, how about for the Egyptians? They were also polytheistic, many, many gods. However, the Egyptians were a positive people, so they believed many of their gods helped them. Now, one of the things I want you to know is mummification was part of an afterlife. They felt if they kept the body in good form, that people could come back and their ka, or spirit, would be rejuvenated and could continue to guide them in the afterlife. Their gods were also tied to nature. Their chief god was Ra, the sun god, but there are many other gods that involved powers of nature as well. Now, this was the picture I was supposed to show you first off. This is Nurasag, the Sumerian god, or Earth Mother. Okay, and then over here, I believe this is it Anubis? I'm not really sure. I'll have to look it up. But I want you to note, because later on this is going to be an important factor, Egyptian gods often had human bodies with the heads of animals. That's going to play a role later on. Now, one last little thing about Egyptian religion. They believed in something called Ma'at, that you should do the right thing. Do the right thing. That sounds like a good idea. Listen to this. The Egyptians, with that idea of do the right thing, believed that the god Osiris, which was sort of the god of the afterlife, would weigh your spiritual heart. If it was weighed down by doing bad things, it would be heavier than a spiritual feather. Your spiritual heart would be heavier than a feather. And that means that you would spend eternity being devoured by a beast called the Devourer of Souls. All right, a couple last things on religion. The Sumerians built structures called ziggurats. They were a religious temple that were located in the center of all their city-states. This is what a ziggurat looked like. Now, priest and priestess were the only people that were allowed in the ziggurat. Now, believe it or not, there were ceremonies that were tied to nature and fertility. So the priest and the priestess might scootily poop. Yes, that's where the religion happened. Egyptians also built structures for religious reasons. They had temples, but pyramids are probably the most famous. The pyramids were burial tombs for their pharaohs, at least we think, unless you think those aliens may have built them. I'm not sure. So the last thing I want you to do is right here on their notes, if you could use this area to say how you think that the Sumerians and Egyptians viewed religion differently and give some examples, it would be a great idea. You probably want to pause the video to do that. Except for the fact that... Okay, so what are the big ideas that I want you to get from this video? Well, the first idea that I want you to get is that both Egypt and Mesopotamia were ruled by monarchs, kings, and they had class system. Both had slavery. Number two, both had symbol-based writing systems which required scribes. And the third big idea is that both were polytheistic, a belief in many gods, and their gods were based in nature. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. The next video we're going to talk about the other groups in the Middle East.